Thanks, Carla. Yeah, we certainly need radical reform of further and higher education. So far as the bill sort of states its objective, a desire to improve the quality of further and higher education, one couldn't quibble much with its aspirations to promote the interests of students, to advance equality, diversity, inclusion, achieving excellence in teaching, learning, etc., maximise the contributions of higher education to social, economic, cultural, Irish language, environmental development and sustainability. So those are all very worthy aspirations. But I'm not really sure how the bill achieves any of those things. I just don't see the connection between the aspirations that are set out in terms of the purpose of the bill and the bill's own description of itself, if you like, and what the bill actually does. I'm somewhat baffled as to what this bill sets out to achieve. I mean, I don't see, for example, how reducing down the governance bodies or boards of universities and designated higher level institutions, as they're now called. We'll have another acronym now, DHEI, is it? But how does reducing down the board from 40 to 17 improve things? I don't really understand that. Currently, I was just chatting to student union representative, in those boards of 40, you have about 4 students, you have 4 to 6 trade union representatives usually, you have some councillors, and then you have other appointees. With this new 17 number, we'll have less students, we may not have any trade union representatives, we'll certainly have less, and we will have more, as I understand it, ministerial appointees, and then appointees that the body itself selects based on expertise. Now, I just don't really understand how this reduction down in the board, I'm not saying they're brilliantly functioning at the moment, but I don't see what this achieves. I don't really see what this new Higher Education Authority, or Tutoros, with its 12 board members, if I understand correctly, it's got to be gender balanced, good, of course. It's got to respect diversity and so on. It's got to have one student representative, but they're all appointees. Again, I just don't really see how this guarantees anything of the sort of reform and the aspirations that the bill is setting out. And there's nothing in it that I really see as kind of, this is a radical departure to address the problems in further and higher education. I just don't really see it. In fact, I'm a little worried about it because you have all these external appointees, and I just wonder who they will be. Because to my mind, one of the biggest problems with further and higher education is the corporatisation, the corporate takeover of further and higher education over recent years, where because of the underfunding of further and higher education over many decades, there has been higher level and further universities, colleges and so on have been pushed essentially towards trying to get more and more sponsorship from the private sector, from the business. I mean, it appalls me as somebody who is an UCD that you have monuments to Tony O'Reilly and all sorts of other people up there. You know, there's probably Dennis O'Brien buildings somewhere, is there? There probably will be soon if there isn't now. You know, that horrifies me, quite honestly. And the idea that our universities and our colleges and our higher education are going to have to depend on the patronage of billionaires and the super wealthy to get buildings, to fund courses, to fund research, that worries me deeply. And I think, just judging from, you know, some of the stats about the mental health problems that first-year students, for example, NUIG did a survey about the extraordinarily high number of students who are suffering with mental health issues, the high level of dropouts, and so on. I didn't see that when I was in college. And I can see the difference when you go up to UCD. That happened to be the place I went. That just the whole place has just become almost terrifying, to be honest with you. It looks so corporate. The pressure on students is just exponentially greater than it was certainly when I was there. It's, you know, it's just become much more dehumanized. And everything I hear from students and from students' unions is that that's where it's at. Lots of students feel incredible stress, incredible pressure, incredible financial pressures, huge problems sourcing affordable accommodation. The accommodation that is built on campus is incredibly expensive. Colleges pushed onto a massive over-reliance on non-EU students. Not that I have any problem with non-EU students, but they have to pay full fees, and that's a big problem for them, many of them. And so colleges want to get people who pay full fees because they're not getting enough subsidy from central government to fund further and higher level education. And of course, one of the most terrible facts, there have been some improvements, of course, but the fact that, as we discussed in our motion that we brought on this issue to the Dáil, to the Convention Centre when we were there last March on open access to further and higher education, but that 99% of people from Dublin 6 go to university and college, whereas the figure is about 15% from working class areas, from predominantly working class areas. You know, that's just a shameful fact about the inequity that exists in access to universities, to further and higher education. Now, I know it's improved somewhat, but Jesus, we have a long, long way to go in terms of the unequal access. And then, of course, but those pressures carry on once you get in to college or university, as I said, because of the extraordinary difficulty in getting accommodation, if you need that, the extortionate rents, that, you know, somebody who has to work their way through college, for example, you know, they'd be working all the hours that God sent, and they still wouldn't be able to pay some of the rents that are being charged in on-campus accommodation, never mind all this private student accommodation that's being billed by investment funds charging €1,000 a month. And sure, how are you supposed to study then? When you're working like a dog to pay these rents, if you can even manage to try and pay these rents, and then you're trying to study, and so many just can't do it. They just can't do it. So student poverty is rampant, mental health issues are rampant. And something, of course, I've highlighted again and again, very relevant in the week that we're in it with the scandal in North Kerry, but which is part of a wider problem of chronically deficient mental health services for young people, whether they're adolescents or people just young adults, and many of them are students. But the huge irony, which I've highlighted, prompted by some of the people who are studying subjects in these areas, like psychology, like occupational therapy, like speech and language, where we have chronic shortage. Tánaiste said it again today, but great difficulty recruiting people to fill these posts where we need counselling services, but we make it absolutely virtually impossible or extraordinarily difficult for the people who actually want to fill those posts, study those subjects and do those jobs in psychology, in occupational therapy, in speech and language therapy and so on, to qualify because of the extortionate post-grad fees, the lack of funding, for many of those doctorate courses in psychology. As I pointed out, no funding whatsoever for doctorates in counselling and education psychology, precisely the sort of thing we need in our schools, we need in our colleges to help our young people, no funding whatsoever. And I talked to some of those young people trying to get qualified in psychology, and they were just saying it's just, they're in a dire situation because they're landed with these fees, they're trying to work at the same time, and they're on placement, and they're trying to study, and we're just like putting every barrier we possibly can in the way of them getting qualified when there's a desperate need for these people to deal with the waiting lists for child and adolescent mental health services. So, I mean, that's a slight tangent, but it's kind of, the point is that our education, further and higher education institutions should be helping us solve these problems, but we're actually making it very, very difficult for people to get into these institutions, and then making it very, very difficult for people to do the things that they want to do in those institutions. So we need radical change in that regard. And it is because they're not funded properly, and then increasingly are pushed towards trying to become more like corporate outfits, raising their own money, which means fees going up, or over-reliance on fees, or extortionately expensive accommodation. The student representative I was talking to today was saying, you know, even if it comes to like counselling, actually, sorry to go on about counselling services, but they were pointing out that money that's given, and I know this is a governance framework for accountability around expenditure in terms of, you know, central government funding, and there should be accountability. But what does that really mean? When at the moment, for example, in UCD, the amount of external, you know, there's some internal counselling services, but the number of people who are outsourced now to private external counselling services has shot up 20-fold in the last number of years. So outsourcing. This bill doesn't say anything about stopping that. Do you know? And probably the college will say, oh, it's cheaper to do with that. I doubt it. But, you know, that's often what's said. Probably because the college doesn't want to direct employees. They want the hassle of people who they actually have to employ and have obligations to employees, so they outsource the counselling services to the detriment of the students. And then, of course, the academic staff, many of whom are postgrads, people doing masters and PhDs and so on, who are on crappy hourly contracts, part-time hours. I think about 50% of people, academic staff, are in precarious working conditions. You know, what is this bill doing to address that? When we massively need to increase the capacity of our third-level institutions to meet the demands and aspirations of young people coming out of school and wanting to progress their education in the things that they want to do, which is very hard for them to do because of the Leaving Cert, stupid, unnecessary, anachronistic Leaving Cert system. You know, even if people get in, we don't have half enough places to meet the actual demand for the things that people want to do. And when I say, oh, we should have open access to the Taoiseach, he says, oh, we don't have the staff, we don't have the capacity. But of course we do, because we've all these academic staff who are on precarious part-time contracts who'd love permanent jobs. They'd love permanent jobs working in our education institutions, but we don't want to actually force the universities and the colleges to employ more people and to increase that capacity by giving them proper jobs and proper job security. So I mean, I just don't really see what this bill does to kind of change any of that. And to me, those are the big issues. Now, maybe the minister, I listened to him earlier on and I read through the stuff, but I just don't really see what this bill achieves, and I would like to see it being much more specific and tied down in terms of the objective to ensure absolutely open access of everybody to further and higher education, to the further and higher education of their choice. That's what I'd like to see. And I think that would be far better for the students. It would be far better for the staff. It would be far better for our society. And ultimately, although I hate reducing education down to economy, but actually it will be better for the economy. If people were able to access the higher education that they wanted to do, that the resources were putting into making sure that was state-of-the-art education, that all those financial and other barriers to people doing what they wanted to do were removed, and we resourced our further and higher education institutions to do that, to support students in providing that kind of education. I think it would be better for the students, better for the staff, and better for our society. And I just don't really see precisely where this bill is going to help achieve that. So I don't know if I have a lot more to really say on it. Maybe the government spokespeople will respond and say I'm completely wrong and it's all in there, and this is going to revolutionise further and higher education and it's going to achieve all those things, but I just don't really see where it is in this bill. I mean, there's nothing particularly objectionable in the bill, but I just don't see what in the bill is going to really change things. And I am specifically concerned about the reduction in the numbers and makeup of those bodies, the governance bodies of our colleges and universities. So I'd like to hear the argument for how that's going to make things better. And sorry, very last point. You know, what would the alternative be in terms of governance itself? Well, I would say it's about the students, the staff, academic and non-academic staff, being the dominant group in the governance of these institutions. Not appointees, not overly paid executives and administrators, but the actual, I think it would be best if they were democratically elected representatives of the students, the academic staff and the non-academic staff, the porters, the caterers, you know, everybody who works in these institutions, actually electing the majority. Of course you will need experts in finance and you'll need other people, but I think the dominant force in running our institutions of education should actually be the people who study in them, the academic staff who deliver the education, and the other workers who make those institutions function. That's what I'd like to see. That to me would be a real revolution in the governance of our further and higher education institutions, but of course all of that would still be moving around deck chairs, as it were, unless we put the resources in that actually ensure we have open access to further and higher education, and that all of those financial and other barriers to people realising their full creative and intellectual potential are removed. And at the moment, those barriers are multiple, and they are fundamentally distorting and damaging, if you like, the ability of our higher and further education institutions to do the job they should be doing, which now is more important than ever when you look at the skills shortages we have in so many areas. Why we continue to allow those barriers to persist, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever for us to do so, and we need to radically overhaul our approach to further and higher education.